In 1945, America quietly changed the way it ate. No law, no government order. Just a decision made by the food industry. They needed families to stop cooking the way their grandmothers cooked. Because if people kept making real food, rendering fat, fermenting vegetables, slow cooking meals, they wouldn't need processed products. So traditional food was rebranded as backward. Old knowledge became something to leave behind. But decades later, science began proving grandmother was right all along. This is the story of the foods they told you to forget and what it cost us when we did. Number 30. The never-empty bone broth pot. In farmhouse kitchens across Appalachia and the rural Midwest, there was a pot that lived on the back of the stove the way a family Bible lived on the mantelpiece. Into it went bones, chicken carcasses, beef knuckles the butcher sold for 2 cents a pound, sometimes gave away entirely. It simmered all day, sometimes through the night, the bones surrendering collagen, gelatin, glycine, and minerals drawn out slowly by a splash of apple cider vinegar, she added, without knowing the chemistry behind it. She just knew the broth turned thick. She just knew that was good. Modern food science spent decades ignoring bone broth, then spent another decade catching up. Research confirmed what Depression-era families knew in their bodies. Glycine supports liver function, gut lining integrity, and sleep regulation, and the minerals released are in a bioavailable form that synthetic supplements struggle to replicate. Today we call it bone broth and charge $12 a jar at Whole Foods. Grandma just called it not wasting the bones. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 29. Bacon grease. Every kitchen had one ceramic, usually, sometimes an old coffee can sitting beside the range, collecting what came off the bacon, off the sausage, off anything that rendered in the cast iron on a Sunday morning. Free. A byproduct of meat already paid for. You fried your eggs in it, seasoned your cast iron with it, spread it on cornbread. In the coal fields of West Virginia, in sharecropper cabins across the Mississippi Delta, that jar was the difference between a meal with depth and a meal with nothing. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Bacon grease wasn't replaced because science proved it harmful. It was replaced because Procter & Gamble needed to sell Crisco, a surplus cottonseed oil byproduct from their soap manufacturing, hydrogenated to look like lard. They funded the American Heart Association and ran the first major food advertising campaign in American history to reposition animal fat as dangerous. Bacon grease contains oleic acid, the same fat found in olive oil. That is not progress. That is one of the most successful frauds ever committed against the American kitchen. Number 28. Wild capture sourdough. Before there was a packet of Fleischmann's yeast in every pantry, there was a crock fed like a small animal every morning, flour and water, kept warm, wild yeast from the air, colonizing it until it bubbled and smelled sour and alive. On the Oklahoma prairie during the Dust Bowl, in San Francisco's immigrant neighborhoods, in farmhouses from Vermont to the Carolinas, sourdough starter was not a hobby. It was how bread got made for 10,000 years. The fermentation process pre-digests the grain. Lactobacillus bacteria consume phytic acid, which blocks mineral absorption, and the result is bread, with a dramatically lower glycemic index than anything made with commercial yeast. A 2008 study in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition confirmed it slows starch digestion and reduces blood sugar spikes. Fleischmann's 1940s advertising positioned wild starters as unreliable and old-fashioned. Within one generation, the crocks disappeared. What replaced them raised blood sugar faster, fed the gut less, and made two companies very rich. Number 7 in Swansig, schmaltz. In Jewish immigrant tenements on the Lower East Side, in the working-class neighborhoods of Chicago's Maxwell Street, schmaltz was what you made from. The fat trimmed from a chicken before cooking, rendered slowly with onions until they crisped into gribanese, leaving behind golden, fragrant cooking fat that made everything it touched tastes like it had been made by someone who loved you. You spread it on rye bread, cooked your potatoes in it. It cost nothing extra because the chicken was already bought. The same campaign that erased bacon grease erased schmaltz. By the 1960s, a generation had switched to margarine, told by doctors who had been told by Ansel Keys that animal fat was death. Chicken fat is now sold at specialty stores for $14 a jar to the grandchildren of women who made it every week for free. Grandma just called it using the whole bird. She was right. Number 26. The fermentation crock. German immigrant communities carried it from Bavaria to the farmhouses of Wisconsin and Minnesota. Into a heavy ceramic crock went cabbage, turnips, green beans, cucumbers, whatever the garden produced in surplus. Salt drew out the water. Lactobacillus bacteria, naturally present on the vegetable skins, consumed the sugars and produced lactic acid, and the vegetables preserved themselves. No heat, no canning equipment, just salt, thyme, and invisible biology that had preserved food for 10,000 years. A pound of salt cost 5 cents in 1933. The vegetables came from the garden. The crock lasted a lifetime. What came out of it was a live dense with lactobacillus cultures that modern microbiome research now links to immune function, mental health, and inflammation control. The same bacteria now sold in probiotic supplements for $35 a bottle were in every spoonful. The refrigerator industry didn't advertise against fermentation. They just made it feel unnecessary. By 1955, the crocks were gone. Number Femogtuva. Pot liquor. Collard greens had cooked down for 2 hours with fatback and black pepper, and what remained in the bottom of the pot was not broth darker, silkier, dense, with everything the greens released during cooking. In sharecropper cabins across the Mississippi Delta, in the rural counties of Alabama and Georgia, you crumbled cornbread into it or sopped it with a fresh piece and called it supper. Nutritionists at Tuskegee University documented what it contained: iron, calcium, folate, vitamins A, C, and K, confirming that a bowl of pot liquor delivered more nutrition per penny than almost any other Depression-era food. Modern cooks pour it down the sink without a thought, because no food magazine ever told anyone it mattered. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 24. Drippings toast. 5 in the morning, a coal mining town in eastern Pennsylvania. A man going into the earth for 12 hours needed something that would hold. Day-old bread laid in a pan, spooned over with the drippings from last night's meat dark, slightly thickened, then slid under the broiler until the edges crisped. The bread was already paid for. The drippings were a byproduct of a meal already made. It cost almost nothing and kept a working man on his feet in the dark for hours. Today, the same concept, roasted bone marrow on toast, appears on gastropub menus for $18 to $22, described as bold and adventurous. Grandma just called it using what was left. She would not have understood why anyone needed to be told to do that. Number 23. Depression French toast. Nothing went hard in a Depression-era kitchen. Bread 2 or 3 days old went into a bowl with thin beaten eggs and stretched milk, soaked until it softened, then cooked in whatever fat was available until the outside was golden and the inside was set and sweet. Eggs cost 3 cents each in 1933. The bread was already there. It fed children before school and left nothing behind. Modern nutritionists have noted that the egg and milk soak creates a protein matrix that digests more slowly than eggs or starch alone, producing sustained energy rather than a spike. The grandmothers who made this were not thinking about protein matrices. They were thinking about the bread that would otherwise go to waste. Restaurants now charge $16 for brioche French toast made from bread baked that morning. The entire point was that it was old. Number 22. Potato water bread. Irish immigrant families in Boston and New York did not pour potato cooking water down the drain. Cloudy with starch, warm, and mineral-rich, it fed yeast more efficiently than plain water, and carried B vitamins leached from the potato skin during boiling. Bread made with it rose faster, stayed fresh longer, and carried more nutrition than bread made with water alone. In the 1940s, commercial bakers began adding synthetic vitamins back into stripped white flour and charging more for what they called enriched bread. Potato water bread on Dorchester Avenue had been delivering those same vitamins for free, from liquid that would otherwise go down the sink. This was not poverty cooking. This was genius that didn't need a label. Number 21. Lard-sealed preservation. Before refrigerators, Midwest farm wives in the 1920s preserved cooked meat by packing it into crocks and pouring rendered lard over the top. As the lard cooled and solidified, it sealed out oxygen completely, and bacteria cannot grow where there is no air. The same principle of oxygen exclusion underlies modern vacuum sealing technology. Lard sealing predated it by at least 40 years in common household use. The FDA's food safety messaging in the 1960s swept broadly against home preservation using animal fats framed around legitimate botulism concerns in low-acid canning, but applied widely enough to eliminate techniques with centuries of proven safety. The commercial refrigeration and frozen food industries did not object to regulations that expanded their market. Number 20. Dandelion greens. Italian immigrant women in South Philadelphia, Cleveland's Little Italy, the north end of Boston, walked vacant lots with a small knife in a paper bag looking for dandelions, not as a foraged curiosity, as groceries. Dressed with olive oil, garlic, and wine vinegar, they were worth sitting down for. The USDA has since confirmed what those women knew in their hands. Dandelion greens contain more beta-carotene than carrots, more calcium per gram than milk, more iron than spinach. Among the most nutritionally dense plants in North America, growing everywhere, free. Scots introduced weed-begone herbicide in 1956 and spent decades convincing Americans that a lawn with dandelions was a lawn of failure. What it produced was the systematic poisoning of the most nutritious free food source on the continent. That is not progress. That is a herbicide company turning your grandmother's grocery store into a crime scene. Number 19. Sprouted grain porridge. In Mennonite farming communities across Ohio and Indiana, whole wheat berries or rye were soaked overnight and allowed to just begin sprouting before being cooked down into thick porridge. A pound of grain cost 2 cents in 1930, and the result was filling in a way that went beyond simple bulk. Modern nutrition has identified exactly why sprouting activates phytase, an enzyme that breaks down phytic acid, the compound in all grains that binds minerals and blocks absorption. Research published in the Journal of Food Science confirmed sprouting increases the bioavailability of zinc, iron, and magnesium by significant margins. The same principle is now sold as activated grains in specialty health food products for $12 a bag. Mennonite grandmothers called it soaking the grain overnight. It was not a health trend. It was Tuesday. Number 18. Salt box, dry curing. A wooden box packed with salt into it went pork bellies, hams, bacon slabs. Salt drew moisture out through osmosis, dropping water content below the level where bacteria can survive, preserving the protein for months without refrigeration. The resulting meat was firm and deeply flavored in a way that has no modern equivalent except products now sold at specialty delis for $28 a pound. USDA regulations, tightened substantially in the 1970s, made home curing legally complex, framed around consumer safety, but written in ways that benefited the commercial meat processing industry, which had consolidated significantly by that point and had no interest in competing with home production. Italian prosciutto, Spanish jamon, French saucisson, all the same tradition, now sold as artisan luxury. The knowledge that made them was classified as a liability. Number 17. Bean cooking liquid. Before a French musician named it aquafaba in 2014, Every woman who cooked dried beans from scratch in Mexican-American kitchens in Texas and California, in the poor neighborhoods of every southern city she knew, the liquid left in the pot was not waste. Thick, slightly foamy, it bound things, thickened soups without flour, and stretched stews. She used it because she used everything. Today, aquafaba is sold in cartons at health food stores, described by food writers as a remarkable discovery. Grandmothers cooking beans in southern Texas in 1938 were not discovering anything. They were just not wasting what they had already made. Number 16. Cast iron as technology. It came with the house, or from the mother, or was bought once at a hardware store in 1922 for 60 cents and was still in the kitchen 40 years later. The seasoning on a well-used cast iron pan, layers of polymerized oil baked into the iron over years of use, creates a surface that is genuinely non-stick, chemically stable, and self-reinforcing. The more you use it, the better it works. A 1,986 study in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association confirmed that cooking acidic foods in cast iron measurably increases their iron content, making the pan a passive nutritional supplement that nobody in Depression-era America had to purchase. DuPont invented Teflon in 1946, and by the 1960s, Teflon-coated cookware was in mass production. PFAS, chemicals in the coating, leach into food when scratched or overheated compounds. The EPA has since classified as likely carcinogens, and that the European Union began restricting in cookware in 2020. The pan that lasted generations was replaced by one that poisoned food and had to be thrown away every few years. That is not progress. That is a recurring revenue model. Number 15. Whey as cooking liquid. In Scandinavian immigrant households across Minnesota and Wisconsin, whey, the pale liquid left after cheese was pressed, went into soup, into bread dough, into anything that needed liquid, and could be made better by liquid that carried more than water. Dense with protein, B vitamins, and minerals, it was the byproduct of a process already completed, poured into the next meal without ceremony. Whey protein, the same substance, dried, powdered, and flavored with artificial chocolate, is now sold in $50 tubs at supplement stores. The women pouring it into their bread dough in Duluth in 1934 were not thinking about protein synthesis. They were thinking about not wasting what the cheese left behind. The nutritional result was identical. Number 14. Whole vegetable cooking. A carrot was not just the orange part. Beet greens went into the pot with the beets. Broccoli stems were sliced thin alongside the florets. Celery leaves flavored stock. Radish tops went into whatever needed green. Carrot tops contain 6 times the vitamin C of the carrot root. Beet greens have more iron than the beet itself. The nutritional logic of cooking the whole vegetable was practiced without measurement by women who simply understood that a plant was the entire plant. Women's magazine Food Photography, beginning in earnest in the 1950s and funded by advertisers selling the clean, packaged parts of vegetables, taught American cooks what produce was supposed to look like: pristine, trimmed, uniform. The rough parts, the green parts, the imperfect parts were discarded before the photograph was taken, thrown away with the nutrition still in them. Number 13. Green tomato preservation. Number 13. First frost was coming. You could feel its weight in the morning air, and every farm wife in Appalachia, every gardener across the rural South went out before it arrived and picked everything left on the vine. Green tomatoes were pickled in brine, fried in cornmeal, layered in crocks with salt to slow ripen over weeks. The nothing wasted philosophy extended to the last day of the season as completely as it extended to every other moment of the year. Modern agricultural science has identified tomatine concentrated in unripe tomatoes as a compound of significant research interest for potential anti-tumor properties. The women who preserved green tomatoes in Hazel Green, Kentucky in 1937 were not throwing away the end of their garden. They knew things about the season that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. Number 12. Sun-dried produce. In Italian neighborhoods of Brooklyn and the Bronx in the 1920s, flat tenement rooftops served a purpose beyond laundry. Tomatoes sliced thick and salted, laid on wooden boards in the August sun, plums halved and pitted, figs spread thin. The sun worked slowly, drawing out moisture and concentrating sugars, acids, and lycopene, until what remained after 4 or 5 days was something entirely different from what went up. Sun-dried tomatoes contain lycopene in concentrations 3 to 4 times higher than fresh tomatoes. Research confirming this appeared in nutrition journals in the early 1990s, roughly 70 years, after grandmothers in Bensonhurst were doing it without needing a journal. They now sell for $8 for 4 ounces in the specialty food section. The rooftop was free. The August sun has not changed its price. Number 11. Cold smoking at home. In Appalachian communities, through the 1920s and 1930s, cold smoking was a standard seasonal practice performed by ordinary families. A small structure generating smoke from hickory or apple wood at temperatures low enough to dry and preserve meat without cooking it. Wood smoke contains phenol-like compounds, including guaiacol and syringol, that modern food scientists confirm have genuine antimicrobial properties. The smoke was not merely flavor, it was functioning chemistry that had kept food safe for generations. USDA regulations expanded in the 1970s, made home cold smoking legally complex, framed around consumer safety, but written broadly enough to benefit the commercial smoked meat industry, which had consolidated significantly by that point, and raised no objection to regulations that eliminated home production as competition. Number 10. Vinegar preservation. Number 10. Apple cider vinegar cost 10 cents a gallon in the 1920s, and into brine made from it went cucumbers, beets, onions, green beans, anything the garden produced in surplus at summer's end. Acetic acid at 5 to 7% created an environment where most foodborne pathogens could not survive, and modern food scientists have confirmed it is more effective against certain organisms, including listeria, than some commercial canning brine solutions. The FDA's post-war push towards standardized commercial canning created a broad cultural distrust of all home preservation, including high-acid vinegar methods, with a documented safety record stretching back centuries. The commercial canning industry did not lobby for a narrow interpretation of those safety concerns. Number 9. Suet pastry crust. Number 9. British immigrant communities in Massachusetts, mill towns, and Minnesota mining neighborhoods made their pies with suet, the hard fat from around beef kidneys, which the butcher gave away or charged almost nothing for grated cold into flour, and worked minimally into a crust that was short, flaky, and stable through long baking in a way that butter crust sometimes was not. Ansel Keys' hypothesis took suet pastry down with everything else, and by the 1960s, Crisco was the standard. The irony, visible now in current lipid chemistry, is precise suet's primary fat is stearic acid, which the body converts to oleic acid, the same monounsaturated fat in olive oil, and which does not raise LDL cholesterol. The partially hydrogenated shortening that replaced it does raise LDL and lowers HDL. The crust replaced for health reasons was healthier than its replacement. Number 8. Bone marrow as cooking fat. Butcher shops on Milwaukee Avenue in Chicago's Polish neighborhoods sold marrow bones for 2 or 3 cents each in the 1910s and 1920s. You roasted them until the marrow loosened and could be scooped out, or simmered the bones and skimmed the fat deep, almost sweet, intensely rich, unlike anything else. Bone marrow contains alkyl glycerols, lipid compounds now being actively studied for effects on immune function and potential anti-tumor properties, And what Polish and Hungarian grandmothers cooked with 3 times a week in 1915 is now being investigated in cancer research laboratories. The same marrow is now served at fine dining restaurants for $22 to $24 an order, described as adventurous. The women who spread it on rye bread for their children's lunches were not being adventurous. They were feeding their families what was affordable. The food industry convinced their grandchildren it was crude. Number 7. Coffee ground reuse. Coffee was 25 cents a pound in 1933, not cheap when a factory wage had been cut by the Depression, so the morning grounds were kept and water went through them again, sometimes a third time. Each brew was thinner but warm and bitter and something, and what those later brews still contained were chlorogenic acids, polyphenol antioxidants, now sold in supplement capsules for blood sugar regulation and cardiovascular health, with effects documented in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Maxwell House positioned fresh, full-strength coffee as the modern standard through their 1930s advertising. Grandma just called it getting everything out of what you already paid for. She was right about that, too. Number 6. Corn silk tea. When corn came in the farm counties of Illinois and Iowa, in Cherokee and Choctaw communities in Oklahoma, the silk was not discarded with the husk. Dried carefully and steeped into a light, faintly sweet tea, it was given for the kidneys, for swelling, for fluid retention from hard physical work in summer heat. Corn silk contains mason and other flavonoids, including quercetin, and a study published in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine in 2011 documented diuretic and anti-inflammatory effects consistent with what traditional users reported for generations. Industrial corn processing now generates corn silk as agricultural waste in volumes measured in tens of thousands of tons annually. The thing that Native American communities dried carefully and used medicinally is now a waste stream. Problem for the corn industry. Number 5. Clabbered milk. Before pasteurization became mandatory across most states, a patchwork process from the 1910s through the 1950s, raw milk left in a warm kitchen naturally fermented into something between yogurt and sour. Cream, tangy and thick, eaten with molasses or cornbread crumbled in. The lactobacillus cultures in properly clabbered milk, Lactobacillus acidophilus, Lactobacillus casei, are the same species now sold in probiotic supplements for $35 a bottle. Pasteurization laws were necessary, tuberculosis was real, but they were written broadly, and the dairy processing industry, which required industrial infrastructure to comply, did not lobby for narrow application. The tradition of fermented dairy at home could have continued alongside pasteurization using cultured starters. Instead, it ended in one generation. And a $35 supplement now sells back what Grandma maintained on her counter for free. Number 4. Nixtamalization, Ashley hominy. Native American communities developed nixtamalization independently across Mesoamerica and the American South thousands of years before European contact. Dried corn, soaked and cooked in wood ash water, the alkali breaking down the outer hull and releasing niacin bound within the kernel in a form the human body could actually absorb. When industrial corn milling spread across the American South and removed this step for efficiency, pellagra, a niacin deficiency disease, became epidemic. By the late 1930s, hundreds of thousands in the rural South were suffering from it. The USDA documented the connection directly. Mexican-American communities in Texas and the Southwest maintained the tradition of masa and hominy made by nixtamalization and did not experience pellagra at the same rates. They knew things about corn that industrial America would spend 20 years and thousands of lives learning through catastrophe. That is not an accident of history. That is what happens when you replace 10,000-year-old food knowledge with a processing shortcut. Number 3. Rendered tallow. Number 3. Every butcher in America through the 1940s had a bucket of beef fat trimmings available for almost nothing, rendered slowly into tallow, stable at high heat, in a way plant oils are not, producing fried food with a crust no one has fully replicated since. McDonald's cooked its French fries in beef tallow until 1990. The flavor people still describe from that era was the tallow. In 1990, under sustained pressure from a lobbying campaign funded in part by the soybean industry, McDonald's switched to partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, which contains trans fats, which the FDA subsequently banned. Modern lipid chemistry confirms tallow's stability at frying temperatures is superior to polyunsaturated seed oils, which oxidize at high heat and create free radicals that damage cellular DNA. The fat that was replaced because it was supposedly dangerous was replaced with something that actually was. She was right. The tallow was right. All of it was right. Number 2. Fermented brine as a health drink. In Russian Jewish communities of Brooklyn and the Bronx, in the Eastern European neighborhoods of Cleveland and Pittsburgh, there was always brine left when the fermented vegetables were gone cold from the cellar, sour, salty, alive with lactobacillus. Women drank it in the morning, gave it to sick children, sipped it after hard work in summer heat. Researchers at Brigham Young University published a study in 2010 confirming pickle brine relieves exercise-induced muscle cramps significantly faster than water. The same live lactobacillus, natural sodium, and acetic acid that grandmothers in Flatbush drank every morning for free from the jar left after the pickles were gone. Pickle brine is now sold at health food stores as pickle juice shots for $3 for 2 ounces. Grandma just called it finishing the jar. Number 1. Dried beans, soaked overnight, cooked from scratch. 5 cents a pound in 1935. Soaked overnight in cold water on the counter, drained in the morning, set to cook low and slow through the afternoon. Fed a family of 6. Left enough for tomorrow. Cost less than anything else a family could put in a pot. The overnight soak reduced lectin's plant defense compounds that irritate the gut lining and reduced phytic acid, meaning the iron, zinc, and magnesium in properly soaked beans were bioavailable in ways that canned beans, pressure processed without soaking, cannot match. The long, slow cook broke down complex starches into forms the body digests steadily without a blood sugar spike. Canned beans were marketed as equivalent when the industry introduced them in the 1940s. They were not equivalent. The difference was sold away for a product that cost more and fed you less. Dried beans on the stove were, and remain, the single most nutritionally complete, cheapest, most sustainable protein source in American history, and the food industry convinced an entire nation, in less than 20 years, that they were too much trouble. Closing. Go back and look at what this list actually is. Sourdough on the counter, a crock of cabbage quietly fermenting in the cellar, bacon grease in a jar by the range, beans soaked since last night, bone marrow and pot liquor, and corn silk drying on a cloth, a cast iron pan that will outlast everyone in the house. These were not the practices of people who didn't know any better. This was an integrated, self-sufficient system, one that wasted nothing, spent almost nothing, and produced results that we are now, with great expense and considerable scientific apparatus, trying to reverse engineer. The grandmothers who kept these kitchens were not behind. They were the last custodians of something that took 10,000 years to develop and 20 years to destroy. Write about the fat. Write about the fermentation. Write about the bones and the beans and the brine. Science is now saying so clearly, without apology in journals that will never reach the people who needed the information 40 years ago. The food industry needed them to forget. They needed you to forget. They built a $100 billion apparatus to make sure forgetting happened and that it felt like progress when it did. It was not progress.